Welcome to the History and Heritage podcast with me, Liam Blake. Join me as we uncover hidden stories and insights that shaped our world. From mysteries to legacies, join us on this journey through time. Welcome back to the History and Heritage podcast. As you know, I don't shy away from the big topics, from my deep dive in the Russian Revolution to my exploration of the Great Famine. And while I sometimes get a bit quirky with episodes like the tsunami of syrup or lawfully odd, today I'm tackling something that could drastically change the world as we know it. As I sit here recording on the 5th of April 2025, this is very much a developing situation. That's why I'm taking a break from my usual focus on the past and examining something very current that could become a defining chapter in future history books: the 2025 Trump administration tariffs. It's a departure from my usual exploration of historical curiosities, but these new tariffs represent a bold move, a potential turning point in global economic relations that could affect everything from your weekly shopping bill to major international alliances. Imagine the global economy as an intricate clockwork mechanism, with each gear representing a different nation's economy, all carefully calibrated to work together through decades of trade agreements. Now, picture someone throwing a wrench into that mechanism, or perhaps recalibrating a mechanism that's been running inefficiently for far too long. That's essentially what these sweeping new tariffs represent. The potential consequences of this economic disruption make it a crucial topic for understanding our future history. The Trump administration has declared trade imbalances to be a national emergency, invoking special powers to fundamentally reshape America's economic relationships with the rest of the world. This bold move signifies a dramatic shift in economic policies, warranting our attention as we consider its potential long-term impacts on both domestic and international affairs. The rationale behind this decision is based on claims of unfair trade practices, the need to level the playing field for American workers and businesses. This isn't America's first experience or experiment with protectionism. The Smoot-Hawley Tariffs of 1930 offer a cautionary tale. While they aimed to protect American jobs, many historians believe they exacerbated the Great Depression by stifling global trade. The historical lessons from this era should inform our understanding of the potential risks and the potential benefits, if handled correctly, of protectionism. More recently, the steel tariffs of 2002 were rolled back after just 20 months due to their economic damage. This example demonstrates the potential for unintended consequences and the need for flexibility in trade policy. However, it also highlights the resolve needed to address long-standing issues, even if it requires short-term adjustments. The relatively short lifespan of those tariffs serves as a reminder that such measures should be carefully implemented and monitored. The critical question is whether this represents a temporary negotiating tactic or a permanent shift in US trade policies. The long-term implications depend on the administration's goals and its willingness to compromise, but also on the willingness of other nations to engage in fair trade practices. The future direction of the American trade policy remains uncertain, but the need for decisive action is clear. So what exactly is the declaration and are the policies? Well, on April 2nd, 2025, which was 3 days ago at this point, President Trump made history by declaring trade deficits to be a national emergency, an unprecedented move that immediately raised eyebrows across the political spectrum. This decision sparked immediate debate among economists and political analysts, leading to widespread speculation about the administration's motives and potential outcomes. This action demonstrated the president's willingness to use unconventional means to address economic issues. It's a testament to his commitment to prioritizing American interests. While past presidents have used emergency powers for natural disasters or public health crises, this marks the first time such authority has been applied to what many consider routine economic conditions. The novelty of this approach raises questions about the scope of presidential power and its potential for abuse. However, some argue that these, quote, routine economic conditions have, in fact, become a chronic problem requiring extraordinary measures. The legal basis comes from the International Emergency Economic Powers Act IEEPA, a Cold War era law that gives the President broad authority over international economic transactions during declared emergencies. This law, originally intended for national security crises, is now being used to justify sweeping changes in trade policy. This interpretation of IEEPA is being closely scrutinized by legal scholars, but the administration maintains that the current economic situation poses a clear and present danger to national prosperity. Critics argue that this stretches the law's original intent, while supporters claim it's precisely the tool needed to address what they view as decades of unfair trade practices that have hollowed out American manufacturing. This debate highlights the fundamental divide in perspectives on trade policy and the role of government intervention in the economy. Each side presents compelling arguments, but the administration believes decisive action is necessary to protect American jobs and industries. The administration branded this as Liberation Day, framing it as a breaking free from foreign economic dependence. The administration's rhetoric seeks to rally public support by appealing to nationalist sentiments and promising to restore American economic sovereignty. This narrative is particularly appealing to voters in regions that have suffered from industrial decline. It is, as Trump would say himself, about putting America first, but the reality is more complex. While certain industries may benefit, consumers will likely face higher prices as import costs rise across the board. The tariffs could lead to inflationary pressures, reducing the purchasing power of American households and potentially offsetting any gains in domestic manufacturing. The economic consequences are expected to be far-reaching. It's a trade-off the administration believes is worth making to secure long-term economic stability. The initial 10% blanket tariff affects nearly all imports, but the real story lies in the much higher targeted tariffs on specific countries that take effect just 1 week later. This layered approach suggests a calculated strategy to exert maximum leverage in trade negotiations. The targeted tariffs are designed to pressurize specific nations to change their trade practices and engage in fairer competition. So what exactly are these targeted tariffs? The tariff structure reveals a clear strategy of applying maximum pressure where it will be most effective. The administration's choices reflect a careful assessment of global trade dynamics and strategic priorities. It's a calculated move to reshape international trade relationships and ensure a more equitable playing field for American businesses. China, for example, faces a punishing 34% tariff, particularly targeting their electronics, machinery and textile exports. This continues the trade war dynamics we saw during Trump's first term, but with even higher stakes given the current fragile state of global supply chains. While challenging, this firm stance is seen as necessary to address China's unfair trade practices and intellectual property theft. The European Union receives a 20% across-the-board hit, with German automakers and French luxury goods bearing the brunt. This decision risks straining diplomatic relations with key allies in Europe, who view the tariffs as unfair and protectionist. However, the administration argues that these tariffs are necessary to encourage Europe to reduce its trade barriers and engage in more balanced trade relationships. Pharmaceutical imports from Switzerland and Ireland face similar rates, which could have significant consequences for drug prices in the US. The increase in costs for essential medicines could have a disproportionate impact on vulnerable populations. However, the administration believes that these tariffs will ultimately encourage pharmaceutical companies to bring manufacturing back to the US, creating jobs and reducing reliance on foreign sources. Meanwhile, in Asia, Vietnam's crucial textile and electronics exports got slammed with a 46% tariff, potentially disrupting supply chains for nervous American retailers. The high tariffs could devastate Vietnam's economy, which relies heavily on exports to the US. The administration argues that these measures are necessary to address currency manipulation and other unfair trade practices. What's particularly striking is how these tariffs disproportionately affect developing economies. The tariffs could exacerbate existing inequalities and undermine efforts to promote economic development in these nations. However, These tariffs could ultimately also create a more level playing field, allowing developing economies to compete fairly without resorting to unfair trade practices. Countries like Lesotho at 50%, Cambodia at 49%, and Laos at 48% face devastating rates that could collapse their export sectors overnight. While these may be smaller players in the global trade, the administration hopes this firm action will encourage these nations to adopt more transparent and equitable trading policies. The ripple effects are already starting to be felt. Major retailers are warning of price hikes ranging from 15 to 30% on affected goods by the summer. These price increases could significantly impact consumer spending and overall economic growth. While concerning, the American viewpoint is that these price hike increases will be temporary and the consumers will ultimately benefit from a stronger, more resilient American economy. Car makers are scrambling to adjust production schedules as imported parts become prohibitively expensive. The administration says that this will encourage automakers to increase domestic production, creating jobs and boosting the American economy. The pharmaceutical industry is bracing for shortages of certain drugs that rely on overseas manufacturing. America is working to incentivize domestic production of essential medicines to ensure a reliable and affordable supply for American patients. The diplomatic fallout has been swift. The EU has already threatened retaliatory tariffs on American agricultural exports, while China has hinted at restricting rare earth mineral exports crucial for technology manufacturing. This tit-for-tat escalation could lead to a full-blown trade war worldwide. The Trump administration says it is prepared to stand firm in the face of these threats, believing that it is necessary to defend American interests. Smaller nations are banding together through organizations like ASEAN, which is ASEAN, to coordinate their response, marking a potential shift in global trade alliances. The tariffs could lead to a realignment of global trade relationships, with smaller nations seeking to reduce their dependence on the US. The administration remains open to negotiating fair trade agreements with all nations, but will not compromise on its commitment to protecting American interests. Domestically, Rust Belt manufacturers are celebrating what they see as long overdue protection, while coastal tech and retail hubs warn of coming job losses. This divide highlights the complex and often conflicting interests at play in trade policy. Economists are divided. Some predict a short-term shock leading to stronger domestic industry in America, while others warn of stagflation as rising prices combine with slow economic growth. The administration is confident that its policies will ultimately lead to a stronger and more resilient American economy, even if there are some short challenges. If other nations retaliate in kind, we could see a domino effect leading to a new era of economic nationalism worldwide. This scenario could force a necessary re-evaluation of global trade practices. The potential for a downward spiral economically is a serious concern, but perhaps it is a necessary correction. Alternatively, if the tariffs succeed in bringing manufacturing back to American shores, it could reshape global supply chains for decades to come. This outcome could lead to a greater economic self-sufficiency and stronger industrial base for the US, making America more resilient and less vulnerable to foreign influence. What's clear is that we're witnessing a pivotal moment in American and world economic history. The decisions made today will have lasting consequences for the global economy tomorrow. This is a defining moment that demands careful consideration and analysis, but also decisive action. As I wrap up today's special, it's worth remembering that economic policies aren't abstract concepts. They affect real people's lives in very concrete ways. The factory worker in Ohio hoping for more job security, the small business owner in Vietnam facing bankruptcy, and the American family budgeting for higher grocery bills. These tariffs will touch them all. These are human stories behind the headlines. It's about prioritizing the well-being of Americans and ensuring a brighter future for all the world. Thank you for joining me on this special current affairs edition of the History and Heritage podcast. As always, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Do you see these tariffs as necessary medicine for the economy or a dangerous gamble? Let me know. Next time, I'll return to my regular historical programming. After that heavy topic, I'm thinking something a little bit lighter. Be sure to send me your suggestions. Thanks for listening, and remember, according to Mr. President, America's best days are always ahead.